Welcome back to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. In this episode, we're diving into a struggle many of us know well, the drive to people please and the shame that keeps us stuck in that cycle. Today, we're joined by Abby Payne, a former ICU nurse turned self-care coach and board-certified nurse coach. Abby's journey into people pleasing began in the midst of burnout at the height of the COVID pandemic, a time when her own needs were buried under the constant drive to help and to say yes to patients, colleagues, and the demands of the healthcare system. As Abby reached a breaking point, she began an exploration of the roots of people-pleasing, discovering that this pattern often begins as parent-pleasing and becomes an ingrained survival mechanism that many of us hold on to. Through her research and experience, Abby uncovered how people-pleasing is a response to shame, fear, and unresolved emotions that many of us never learned how to handle. She'll share how this behavior becomes a way of avoiding uncomfortable feelings, seeking external safety, and ultimately trying to control how others perceive us. Abby's insights draw on her expertise as a nurse coach, her personal journey, and frameworks like polyvagal theory to explore how we can rewire our responses. We'll unpack how people-pleasing often stems from a self-worth wound, where we equate our value with how much we do for others. Abby will guide us through ways to start healing, from connecting with our inner child to learning to create safety within ourselves. And she'll explain how embodying radical acceptance and taking radical responsibility can allow us to step out of these patterns and into a more trusting, values-driven life. Let's dive in. Hi, Abby. I'm so excited that you're here and for this episode.
Hello. I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to start every episode just doing a one-word check-in with our bodies, just kind of describing where we're at right now, just to get a sense for the energy we're bringing into the space. So if you could describe how you're feeling right now with one word, what would it be?
I think it would be purpose. The feeling behind that word is that feeling of when you're in alignment with what you're supposed to be doing and your natural gifts. That sense of flow. I've been feeling that a lot lately, the last couple days, and today it's especially strong, that sense of alignment and purpose.
I love that. And I think being able to see the sort of cognitive side and then matching it with the feeling side of it, especially. I feel like it's something more than acceptance, but I'm having a hard time figuring out what the word would be. But I've been having this, it's been a very iterative process of getting to a place of working through some of my own shame around performance, a feeling like I have to make more, do more, constantly be in that state of, I think like so many people get into, where you get to the end of the night and you're like, my to-do list is longer than the day started. I don't know what to do. And I'm shaming myself for not doing enough, but I'm like feeding on that energy and that motivation. And I'm like getting to a place where I'm finally starting to accept what balance actually feels like to me, and dealing with some of the shame stories around my husband doesn't think I'm worthless because I don't make as much money as him. Contribution is not just money. My daughter doesn't really care how much money I make or, what that looks like. I'm allowed to have a day she goes to school, and I simply want a meal plan, like just little things that feel really good. So I'm feeling that for sure. And as we're going to get into when we talk about people pleasing, I think a lot of my healing around it is letting go of my very hardwired way of existing in the world, which was take care of everyone and everything at all costs. And my worth and value is based on how much I can do, not who I am as a person. So it's cool to start to be finally kind of getting to a place where I'm working on that part of the process.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying about, I call it productivity-based self-worth, where it's how much can I produce, how much can be squeezed out of me, and a lot of that being monetary, and redefining what success means to me. Like, is success my impact? Is success having a slow snow day and watching a movie and making some good food. Like success gets to be what I define it to be. And there's all these layers of conditioning that are continually being stripped away. And I call myself a recovering people pleaser because it's definitely been a deep root in my life. And of course, it comes up. I get triggered and it's more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's quieter. And it definitely feels like a healing relationship I have with myself through
Yeah.
people pleasing. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think my guess is for so many people listening to this, but particularly just kind of riffing off of what you're saying, it's this idea of, now I'm in a role as a parent and I think about my daughter and what I want to give her. And I don't want to gift her with this notion that her self-worth is productivity based. I want
Mm-hmm.
her to see that her worth is around who she is as a person. And I think sometimes I take it too far where I'm like so much trying to overcorrect that she's probably like, fuck, mom, just like, we don't need to talk about this again. Like, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like that was a big driver for me in that sense. And realizing those pieces, it's also really, it's easy to exist in sort of two states. And I'll find myself doing that where it's like, well, when I'm in parent mode, gosh, that is a driver force for me. I don't want her to feel that way. So then when she's not around, it like comes up in like full force times 10 of like, so now we're still doing it. We're just not going to do it in front of her. And so having to really reconcile that that's not actually embodying the values I want to give her. And that from an energy perspective, she's still going to feel that. And so having to realize like, I used to be like this with my eating disorder. Like I can't have both. I can't want recovery from an eating disorder and still like restrict or purge every once in a while. Like I kind of have to make the decision of like, no, I'm going to learn how to tolerate my distress. I can want those things, but I'm not going to engage in those behaviors because it's keeping me on both sides. So I've definitely had to navigate that tension point a bit more recently too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned the word balance earlier, and I've been playing with this in my sessions with clients this week. This word balance has come up like 5 or 6 times. And I get an image of like standing on one leg or even on a very narrow balance beam. And what it takes to actually balance is a full body activation. You are keeping yourself upright. You start to go to the left and you have to bring it back. And it's wobbly and it's active. And personally, and with my clients, there's this thought that balance is somewhere you get to where you can finally relax and be like, I've now found balance. But balance is this a little to the left, a little to the right, a little yes, a little no, a little more no, a little more yes. And it's this full body being activation to be at balance. And we need rest from that. We need rest from our healing. But at the same time, that balance, it's being very in tune with what is your capacity. What can you say yes to and what can you say no to? And in people pleasing, we tend to say yes so much that we fall completely off the balance beam and onto the ground. And we feel like you have nothing left to give. You haven't shown up for yourself. You're not empowered and connected to your no. And so balance, until we face our people pleasing and start to learn how to empower ourselves with our no, it can feel hard to find that balance.
Well, I think that's such a interesting way and kind of helps bring us into this idea of, okay, so people pleasing is a thing. It's happening. It is for many people, they've probably heard the term and often either had someone else tell them that they're people pleasing, more likely probably self-diagnose themselves as like, I'm a people pleaser. I think about this one really funny Instagram meme that I saw one time, or no, it was a reel that was like, I'm a people pleaser. I do this, this, and this. And I sent it to like 10 friends who are all laughing and we're like, yeah, it's so true. But like, we're still doing it. And so I think it could be helpful first before we talk about why we do this and then what we can do to stop it. Can you help explain to people what people pleasing actually is and why it's a problem that we need to be talking more about?
That's a really good question. And while I don't have like a typed standing definition, I'll just say what it feels like for me and how it's different than being kind. And so people pleasing is when you are extending yourself at cost to yourself. And there's also a component of You find your sense of self and safety and security in what other people think about you, their perception of you. You're very tied in to that perception for your sense of safety. And how this feels internally, and I'll just speak personally, when I'm in a place of people pleasing, I am really worried about fitting in. I'm really worried about judgment and what other people think. And when I can catch that and recognize, oh, wow, like I am really wrapped up in what my coworkers think about me right now. And I can take a deep breath, I can tune in and ask, like, what do I think about me? And find myself and my own sense of self. But people pleasing, it's very much that your identity, your security is all wrapped up in what other people think about you all the time. And true people pleasing, where it's a chronic issue or problem or struggle, is where you feel that constant tension of having to appease and please everyone else except yourself.
Yeah, I like that you just, as you started, sort of differentiated for people that people pleasing is not synonymous with kindness. And I think for many of us, that has become a point of confusion of to be kind means to take care of somebody, to say yes, even when you don't want to be willing to be inconvenienced. And there is a spectrum of that, like to have any relationship. I was talking about this with my daughter the other day of like being in a relationship with you is actually incredibly like there's always going to be inconvenience. That's not a problem. That's what it means because convenience is never the goal. It's safety and security and connection in the inconvenience. And so I think this idea of, knowing that we're going to have that, but that there's a point for many of us where we've been conditioned to believe that we don't have a choice. It's almost like it's only that way. You have to choose the external. You have to choose the whatever. And this idea of sort of overextension, over-identification, overvaluing. There's this sort of crossover point of like, I matter here, you matter here, but you know what? I'm just going to skip over me completely to value what's going on to that point. And my guess is, because you're, talking about you've experienced this and you've obviously gotten to a place you can recognize it. I know I have been doing this since I was a child. I have been doing this since probably my daughter's age, if not sooner. And I love that when you talk about this, you use the word parent pleasing to help build some context as to how this could happen and why some of us get to this point. So what is parent pleasing and how does that fit into the overall construct of how people maybe become people pleasing people? People pleasing people? People pleasers.
The people pleasing people.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Nice triple alliteration there.
Yes.
Yeah, the parent pleasing piece. I was scrolling on Instagram a couple years ago when I was first unpacking my own people pleasing, realized I was a people pleaser. And I saw this Instagram that said people pleasers start as parent pleasers. And I was like, whoa, that is about the truest thing I think I've ever read. And when I started digging into that a little bit more, I learned that that's not always true, but it is often true that we get it in childhood as we're developing our sense of self and how we move within the world, how we relate to other people. Children are sponges. They are absorbing everything around them. How do I get safety? How do I get what I need? How do I feel okay? What does mom need? What does dad need? What does grandma need? And they're constantly absorbing, how do I exist in this house? And how do I not get yelled at? How do I get a hug? They're absorbing all of this at like a subconscious level, a very deep level. And if you have a parent who maybe is emotionally immature, for example, they're very emotionally immature, their emotions are big and hard and difficult for them to handle. And as a child, and I'm speaking from my own experience with that, as a child, I very deeply internalized that it's my job to manage her emotions for her or to not trigger her to feel something big because she doesn't have the capacity for it. So I at a very early age started moderating my own behavior, my actions, my words to not trigger my parents, my caregivers, and then internalizing all my own emotions and really becoming self-sacrificing. At an age, as a child, you're supposed to be held and taken care of and have the guardrails of love and safety. But when your caregivers are needing that for themselves and expecting almost that from you, there's this giving that happens where you can develop people pleasing. And like I said in the beginning there, it often can stem in childhood because, like I said, we're creating our self-concept. But what I've also learned is people pleasing can arise in any institution, relationship, or situation where you feel like you have to be silent, deferent, or compliant in order to feel physically, emotionally, or socially safe. And I'll say that again. Any time that you felt you needed to be silent, deferent, or compliant to be physically, emotionally, or socially safe, you can develop people pleasing. So this can happen in a romantic relationship later in life. This can happen in an institution. I'm in a nursing background. Definitely in that background, in that situation, you might not have been a people pleaser as a kid, but after spending 5 years in nursing, you might develop where it feels like I have to be quiet, deferent. I can't be confrontational. I have to absorb all of this for my patients because they're going through so much, that you can develop people pleasing later. But most people I find, when I ask them how long they've struggled with people pleasing, they say for as long as they can remember. And it started with parent pleasing.
When I think a lot about the idea, so a couple of things came up for me as you're talking. One, this idea of conditional versus unconditional love. And so many of us grew up with the belief that love was based on meeting conditions and expectations. And that is not to then make parents, caregivers, adult figures the villain. That's often what they grew up believing. And so we've come leaps and bounds away from this idea of, I was just telling Everly the other day at the table, she's struggling sometimes with, she wants to share stories and like her social cues aren't fully there yet. She's 4.5. So she'll like kind of interrupt someone else who's talking because she wants to talk. And we're working on, hey, that person's in the middle of telling us a story. We're going to let them finish. And then I'd love to hear what you have to say. And so how to like help kind of create that boundary. When I think about my mom growing up or my grandma, she was of the generation of, it's like kids are supposed to be seen, not heard. Like they weren't even allowed to take up space. And so we see the shifts and we've really passed the baton further and further down the line. But there's still this residual idea for many of us that we have to meet conditions to be loved, to be accepted, to be given celebration in some way, shape, or form. And that's tricky because now I can say on a parent side, I still have to teach boundaries and expectations. And how do you do that from a values-driven perspective when they're 4 and consequences are really all about external give or take? And so
absolutely.
I want to have empathy for the fact that this gets developed. But I think what you said that's key in that is it's the mixture between the sort of conditional love and expectation matched with some sort of emotional or physical, maybe mental parentification. I am now some role confusion of what role I play and what job I have. And so with parents, we see it in that term parentification. But we can see it in partnerships and friendships where we play roles that are not fair for us or the other person. And when we take on that role, we assume a position of power and responsibility for someone's well-being that takes us out of this very open and safe space for both. Because now the power differential exists. And that's where shame comes in. And that's where all of these, lack of boundaries and whatever. And so as I thought about all of this, and as you mentioned, whether it's nursing, whatever, I could see where then, whether it's happened with parents or it happens, in your nursing career or in a relationship when you're older, I think most of us start off with the interest of being kind. And I think that is an innate thing for us that we want to connect. We need connection and belonging to survive. So we start by doing that. But it is that role confusion matched with the conditions, matched with those power differentials that then make us go from, I want to take care of people, I want to be there for people, I want to love them, to I have to take care of people. I have to be responsible for them.
Yes, yes. And in my own experience, their emotional well-being, like I'm
Mhm.
responsible for everyone else's good time. Like if you're a
Mm.
hostess at a party and you're like just burning yourself into the ground, making sure the candles are lit and that the punch is filled up and that the music is just right. And oh my gosh, I got to get that right. And people might not like this song. And you're full of this internal anxiety
Mhm.
because you feel like everybody else's good time is your job. And the big shift that of the many big shifts with my people
Mhm.
pleasing journey has been that other people's good time, happiness, joy is their responsibility, not mine. I can go
Mhm.
to any party and choose to have a good time. I can also have gotten into a fight with my spouse, and no matter what another person's going to do, I'm going to be in my head and look like I'm not having a good time. But none of
Yeah.
that is because of the host or the hostess. It's my job, my responsibility, my emotions, other people's emotions, theirs. And it's not to swing to the side of being like a self-serving jerk where you're just like me all the time in my emotions, but
Mhm.
to truly not enmesh yourself with other people's emotions being solely your job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had two, one, a celebration moment of that feeling you described as a party host. I witnessed it with a mom hosting a party last year where I was like, oh my gosh, she didn't even get to enjoy her daughter's birthday because she was so having to be on the whole time, making sure all the parents were okay. Are they all mingling? They don't really know each other. Are the kids okay? Are the kids doing all these things? What about my other child whose birthday it isn't? And are they feeling okay? And like, I
Mhm.
watched this and I felt so much shame about making the decision that my daughter's birthday this year, I'm not hosting it and we're going somewhere else for the reason
Heck
of,
yeah.
I don't want to do that because I know myself well enough to know that I will, which I know is a very healthy adaptive decision, but my shame is still making it where you're doing something wrong, you're spending money you shouldn't, what are other people
Mm.
going to think? This is all of that. So I had the one side of, I can see the growth. I can also see where I'm still doing that. On the flip side, I think what you just talked about around this idea of, I think about askers versus guessers and this notion of like, we've all had the friend growing up, or maybe you were that friend growing up where they would ask for whatever they wanted. Can I play with you? Can I
Yes.
come over to your house? Can I have a sleepover? And you're like, what the fuck? You're not supposed to do that. Like, you wait to be invited.
Absolutely
And
right.
they're the askers. They're just like, no, this is what I want. I'm going to ask for it. And I am the guesser of like, no, I'm going to make the assumption about whether or not they would want me to ask. And if they have the capacity to do this thing that I may or may not be considering asking them. And then I'm probably
Mhm.
never going to ask them because I'm going to get to a place of assuming I just need to be okay or just like wait. And so that notion of when you described like, my emotions, my reactions, my feelings are mine, other people's are
Mhm.
theirs.
Mhm.
There seems to be this sort of overlap of guessers and projectors with people pleasing and that behavior.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And while you were saying that, other people's no and other people's ability to say no for themselves. I think when you struggle with people pleasing yourself, it's easy to assume that everyone else does too.
Mm-hmm.
And that
100%.
other people, if you say, hey, I'm going to this thing, you want to come, but they've got a lot going on. You're like, I don't want them to have to say yes to something that they don't have the capacity to do. But I have learned other people don't have a problem saying no like I
Mm-hmm.
do. And that's projection, where it's like I'm projecting that we all struggle with saying no and an empowered no. I've got too much going on that weekend, but thanks for the invite. Other people they have an easier time with that depending on how they were raised and their own makeup. And
Mm-hmm.
also just hearing you talk about the party and the mom who's hosting, I think when it comes to is it people pleasing or not, is There are people who are naturally extroverted, hostess. They love it. They
Yes.
are like, I'm in a flow state. I love having these parties. Are you guys good? Can I get you anything? And they're feeling in alignment with their authenticity versus me hosting a party and I'm just a big ball of anxiety. Is everybody okay? Should I change the music? What are they thinking? Do they like the food? And it's very different. So it's internal work to know what your authenticity is. And I think that in people pleasing, we can have a shaky sense of self, of who am I really? What are my gifts? What's my aligned yes? Do I love to host a party or do I hate hosting a party? And I'd rather outsource that to the person who loves it, who's made that their business. And finding out who you are on purpose and giving yourself permission to know who you are. Because when you're constantly doing things for other people from when you're a kid, it can be easy to not really develop your true sense of self.
I think that's so important. And that association with, I just watched Inside Out 2 not too long ago. And they talk a lot about the sense of self and the establishment of a sense of self. And basically the whole point is the girl was developing one. It was very solid and secure. And then, puberty hits and life hits. And that's the time we're like so afraid that we're going to be rejected. And then the sense of self really becoming anxiety rooted and this notion of what's everyone else going to think. And so the shift in kindness, in intention, all being now about securing some place and some position, which I think, it's important to call out that there's a cultural norm that leads for us to feel like we have to be competing on this social ladder and have so much worth and value to not be left behind or to be rejected. And when we know at our core, we need connection and belonging, it makes sense that people pleasing develops. It is a very natural, like you can draw the line. That is a totally appropriate defense mechanism. It's just not healthy for us in the short term too, but really when we're thinking about the long term, because then it is that question of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know what's important to me. And I don't know and feel safe enough to create the space to answer the question because the train is moving too fast. And I've been on this train for so long, which when you think about this idea and you talked about a lack of security, a lack of safety in the self, so we root it to others, there's a period of time when you unhook it to others, you aren't yet able to hook it to yourself. And that floating feeling is often too much of a risk, or people are like, fuck it, I'll just take care of everything. You know what? I probably do like those things. Yes, exactly. I will just play this part because it's the predictable shittiness of that with a sense of even false security and connection is better than the idea that I won't be able to land in a place I could have it for real.
Absolutely. Yes. The safety and security element is so big because, like you were saying, it worked. When you're a little kid, your mom, like I'll speak personally, my mom, just to give you a little bit of background to help this land, my mom I have a special needs brother with cerebral palsy. And that, a lot of stress, a lot on my mom's plate, a lot of trauma from her past to where her capacity was maxed growing up. So then I very intuitively felt like mom's capacity is maxed. I cannot add to the burden because then mom has a meltdown. And my job, because I don't have cerebral palsy, is to smooth it out, help mom, and absorb my own emotions and the emotions of others around me, walk on eggshells and try to keep everybody okay. Because when mom melted down, that was scary for me. And it was really scary for me as a little kid. So I was trying to protect myself at the root, which is so normal. That's what we all do. We all want to feel safe, connected, loving, belonging, and that everything's okay. So I developed this way of being where I would just absorb everybody else as if they're my job. It's my job to equalize them or not trigger them or manage their emotions. And as I went into my nursing career, I think this is how we get burnout. I mean, you were talking about the train. Like the train is moving so fast and it's hard to get off. As a nurse, your body's the train and your body hits a point where it crashes. And there's this quote by, I forget who it's by, that the body whispers before it screams. And you start to have some whispers in your body. You start to have high blood pressure. You start to have anxiety. You start to not be able to sleep. You're constantly in a state of insecurity, which means to feel a lack of security, a lack of safety, that your nervous system is in fight or flight. Even when you're sleeping, you can be in fight or flight. That's waking up at 2 a.m. with dreaming about work or having stressful dreams. You're constantly fight or flight. Your body can't sustain that. It needs balance. And so then you start to see people crash, whether that's autoimmune stuff, whether it's starting to have panic attacks, insomnia. The body is the train, and eventually the train is like, we have to stop. And that can be a very difficult place to be in because you have to find security in yourself, but you don't know how. And that's that liminal space of you're unhooking from other people, but you don't even know who you are and how to find safety within to hook your safety into yourself. And that's where I think, therapy, coaching, some kind of someone to hold you in that process and provide a little bit of co-regulation with their nervous system to hold you there while you figure out how to find yourself so that you don't feel so alone in it and you can create a new normal.
Yeah, it's really, I think, interesting because, if we use your example and this notion of, I kind of wrote down this idea of my needs are a burden, my wants are a burden, my capacity has to be more, like just thinking about the stories that you take on. And I know a lot of the work that you do for people is around then reconnecting to the body. And as I'm picturing you, this young child, developing these beliefs, your emotions will become a nuisance if you don't learn how to control or detach from them. Your body, your body's cues, the whispers will become a nuisance if you don't figure out how to detach from them. And so there's this degree of, for some people, probably as severe as dissociation, for many people, just a severing of or detachment to the self in different ways. And realizing then that part of the work is to come down and to get to know this version of yourself that you've spent likely decades not knowing. And the complexity then, I think we seek out often relationships to pursue and that value our maladaptive ways of existing. And so oftentimes people that people please end up going into professions where they are people pleasing, or they're in relationships where they're people pleasing. And so nursing is just this example that's pretty extreme of most people that decided to go into nursing have a very strong desire to do good for the world and to help people feel seen, safe, held, all of these pieces. They have likely been at least dabbling on the people pleasing side, not just intentional kindness. And then the norm in the culture is to detach. I used to have so many nursing clients where I'm like, well, you've worked a 12-hour shift. And even though you get a break, and there were times where that wasn't necessarily the case based on people's unions and protections, you're still not taking it because you think you're supposed to be the one in with all the patients. So you're asking your body and your emotional self to just completely stop functioning for 12 hours a day. And then you go home and your body's like slapping you in the face with it. And you're like, I can't feel all this right now. I've got to go back to work, or I've got to do this. So you detach using screens, using alcohol, using whatever. And so then I guess my first question is, when someone is going to do that work, and we're saying we need to start to reconnect to the self, to build some of that safety, to start to even consider what that could look like, how do you do that when the people around you often are recapitulating that same pressure and energy? Is there an initial step you can take to kind of detach from that to allow for a reattachment to the self?
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple different paths that people can take, but one that I seem to focus on with people is this idea of nervous system regulation. And hearing you talk about feelings, I was very afraid of my feelings, particularly the feelings of fear and insecurity. If I started to feel those big feelings of fear, and I used to struggle with panic attacks, disassociation, I felt like I needed to, it was overwhelming. I didn't know how to handle those feelings. And so I stayed in my old patterns and it felt too overwhelming to change. And part of the work that I've done with myself and with clients is to feel your feelings within a window of tolerance. And I'm pulling from some somatic experiencing here of feel your feelings in a window of tolerance with safety. And that can look like using some deep breathing techniques when you're starting to feel overwhelmed to breathe through it. It can look like developing a meditation practice. And there's this idea of vagal tone, which I'm sure you've heard of, but for your listeners, if you haven't, and as a nurse, I might nerd out for a second, but there's this huge nerve in your body called the vagal or vagus nerve. And it goes from your brain all the way down. It goes through your lungs, your heart, diaphragm, intestines, all the way to your rectum. And this nerve is the rest and digest superhighway nerve. It is out there listening. It's a sensory nerve, which means it's taking in information and it's listening to your body. Does she feel safe? Are we in a threat? And you can say in your mind, I'm good, I can handle this, but your shoulders are up to your ears, your abdomen is tense, you're breathing shallow, your heart is racing. Your vagus nerve is going, there must be some kind of a tiger or a threat out there. And you stay in nervous system activation. So part of the work I do with clients is to kick into rest and relaxation on a regular basis to tone that response. Like that rest and digest response can be so infrequently accessed, maybe even years that you've not tapped into that side of your nervous system. Practice being in a state of relaxation, meditation, breath work, exercise, nature exposure. And with nurses, we work 312. So that's 4 days off that you can tone and soothe your nervous system by relaxation techniques so that that can start to become your new normal for your nervous system. And then when you do feel activated and you do have something coming up, you can take some slow, deep breaths and hold your breath with your lungs full to compress the vagus nerve, bring your heart rate down. We can learn these very real techniques to help bring that into a window of tolerance where you can say, I can handle this. I know how to ground myself. I'm safe with myself. We should be the safest people for ourselves in the world. We're us. We are who this is happening to. And that was huge for me to realize I can choose to create a very safe place for me and all my emotions within me. And I can find safety internally and detach from always needing to find it outside of myself. And that took a long time. That's a current practice, continuing to find my sense of safety internally, not in what other people think inside. I'm safe. Even if that person thinks I'm awful, doesn't like me, that is okay because I like me. And that's the self-talk. It's really this beautiful relationship with yourself where you're safe with yourself. And that can take a lot to unpack.
Well, and it's interesting because I feel like every time we talk about something like people pleasing or, body image or self-talk and boundaries, there's a lot of interest in give me the action steps to make me not do this anymore. And so I'm assuming that even people listening to this are like, okay, but how is deep breathing going to stop me from saying yes to the person next to me that's asking me to take something on that I don't want to do, but I don't know how to say no to it yet? And I think what's important that you're pointing out is that's not actually step one. The
Mm-hmm.
goal isn't, when you start this work, to stop people pleasing. The goal is
Mm-hmm.
to start to build that sense of safety in the self. And I think the key part
Absolutely.
being, then it isn't an unhooking with nothing to attach to. We're starting to build that sense of connection to the self. So first, maybe we're
Yeah.
just turning the systems back online. Like, what do I feel in a given moment? What's my body looking for? How do I give my body deep breaths, a glass of water, some rest in this moment, to
Mm-hmm.
start to get all the systems back on track, and starting to see that I can be with myself and be okay. And like you said, for many of us, in that is often a fear of, what am I going to feel? I don't
Yes.
want to feel my body. I don't want to feel my emotions. Well, if we don't deal with that, that's why when you've gone to BuzzFeed or you've bought the latest New York Times bestselling book on how to not be a people pleaser, why you do it for a little bit and you go back, because you've tried to use tools that you're not yet ready to use. And so
Mm-hmm.
your piece, I think, is step one is really about starting to reconnect to the physical and the emotional self.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start with the self-talk. And that's really, for me, at least when I'm working with clients, but honestly, like right now, thinking about myself in these examples, it's the radical acceptance part. Okay, so
Absolutely.
now I'm connecting with myself. One, I can't control that those feelings are there. I can control how I show up for them. Two, gosh, am I so focused on other people? I actually cannot control that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm miserable doing that. And so what does that look like? And I think that even gets to that question around, well, what do you do if everyone around you is still perpetuating these norms? You can't control that either. And
Mm-hmm.
the example I think of from a recent period, it seems so small, but we were getting on an airplane flying back from Wisconsin, and there was a delay. We're like sitting for almost, I think it was almost 2 hours, but I want to say it was
Ugh.
like around an hour and a half where we finally deplaned. So
Mm.
we were like sitting there waiting. They found some sort of mechanical issue. They were giving us updates, no answer. I'm exhausted. My kid is just losing it because she's had a week of like all sorts of overstimulation, poor sleep, time change stuff. Like, she's just done. And I'm like looking over, we're waiting for updates. We end up finding out, okay, now we have to get off a plane and get on another plane. And it's probably going to be at least another 2 hours before we take off. So it ended up being like we were supposed to be at home at like 4 or 4:30. We weren't going to get home until like 9.
Oh.
And I am so anxious and stressed about like anything that comes with travel, but I've worked really hard on trying to release that. Most of those
Mm-hmm.
things, like I'm making a choice to go travel somewhere, I
Yeah.
can't control that. I look over at my mother-in-law and she's like fighting you can see it, like the angst of like feeling out of control, feeling stuck,
Mm-hmm.
feeling stressed. I look around the plane, you can see it. They're feeling out of control, they're feeling stuck, they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
stressed, and you feel the pull into that. And then the recognition of what would it be like if I didn't feel that? It'd be like if I just said like, this sucks. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
invalidate my feelings, but I'm going to like make peace with the fact that I only can control my experience over the next few hours with this. I cannot control when I'm going to get on the airplane. And
Yeah.
that flip was freeing. But you see how even just in that wasn't even about people pleasing. It was just about the nature
Mm-hmm.
of the emotional state around me, how easy it is to get lost in that. So again, coming back to what you're describing, it's like, okay, now you're going to get in tune with yourself. You're going to get a feel for your own emotional, physical self. Now we're going to get a feel for what's in your control. How are you
Huge.
showing up? Who do you want to be? And we're still probably 4 or 5 steps away from like actually stopping the physical or like the specific act of people pleasing.
Exactly.
But the practices are coming into place where then when we make those changes, the buy-in is already there. And I think the key piece, it sounds like in what you do, is the self-trust and the safety is there
Mm-hmm.
to make that change.
The safety to feel your feelings, the safety to notice what you're feeling. Like, whoa, my heart is racing now. I overheard those nurses saying she's so lazy. I don't know if they're talking
Mm,
about me. I don't know if they're talking about someone else, but I'm assuming they're talking about me. And if I'm seen as lazy, my heart's now racing and I'm feeling very nervous. And what if I don't fit in here? And the first step for me was just to go, oh my gosh, look at how activated I am. That is really something. I am really worked up over overhearing someone talk about some other nurses being lazy that might not even be me. And I'm really hooked into what they think about me, and taking some deep breaths and just validating, like, wow, you're really scared right now. You're afraid of not fitting in. And I see you. And that's that inner child piece. I see you, 5-year-old, 6-year-old Abby desperately wants to fit in, desperately wants everyone to think that she's good and helpful. I see you. I breathe with you. And we're going to get through this. And your feelings are your feelings. Just feel them. It's safe. One of my mantras is, it's safe to feel this feeling. I've got you. And it's taking that almost mother-child approach internally and reparenting of, I've got you. You're safe. You can feel this. You can go cry if you need to. You can go to the bathroom and let a couple tears out. It's safe to feel this feeling. That was big for me. And then the control piece, realizing that I'm trying to control how other people view me rather than just be who I am and let them make up their own mind on who I truly am. And I'm trying to manipulate is a big word and a heavy word, but I struggle to find a word that fits better, because manipulation is like trying to adjust the knobs of other people and things outside yourself to suit your own needs. So I have this need for safety because I don't have it within myself. So I'm going to try and manipulate or control how other people view me so that I can feel safe. And what you were saying about control and travel, that has been huge. And there's this quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She has a quote that says, you are afraid of surrender because you're afraid of losing control. But you never had control. All you had was anxiety. And that is another quote that hit me. I never had control over what other people think about me. It was just anxiety this whole time. I can actually be myself once I figure out who that is.
Yeah, right.
And they can decide to say they think I'm lazy because I never pick up extra shifts. I work my 312s. I never pick up extra shifts. They can think that I'm lazy, but I know I'm okay with myself. And I can't worry about what they think anymore. I've got to take care of myself, because I had my own breakdown, meltdown, burnout with nursing. Really had to strip all those layers out and look at that and say, does it really matter? Or does it matter what's in here, in my heart?
I love that. I think it's such a key as we come to sort of a close for people and people are thinking, okay, I want to figure this out. And gosh, these steps feel scary, even though they seem easy in the sense of like taking a minute and taking a deep breath or noticing your surroundings or something to that effect. They're still going to be a toll for us to put into practice. But I think for people to start to see these connections, and I think the thing that you're seeing now is when you can get to that place of giving yourself the roots. I think a lot about that. Like when we are in a state of shame and that externally driven sense of self, our root system is shot. And so we can look like a very strong tree, but it's going to get knocked over at a moment's notice versus that really solid, secure root system. And so I still don't like when people don't like me. I still don't like if someone were to think I'm lazy or a shitty parent or whatever story I still am dealing with in my own shame. I don't like it. That's not the goal to get to that place. We are still social beings and we do care what other people think. It's getting to a place where I'm no longer making the decisions based on trying to control what they are going to think of me and realizing even when I was playing that control game, I still went home thinking that they didn't like me.
Yeah.
That never changed, but I also felt like shit about not making the choices I wanted to make. And so that piece of now, I still leave interactions thinking people don't like me. I'm not to that level in my resilience journey yet. Most every speaking event I do, I leave feeling like an imposter still. Most every time I do one of these points, I'm like, who are you to have a podcast episode to be talking about this? The difference is I've stopped inhibiting myself from making the choices and embodying who I am because I've just decided it's coming along for the ride. Like, I am not going to stop those thoughts because they developed out of a place of, even if it's maladaptive, they were trying to protect me. They were
Survival.
there. Yes. And so going, my brain, my body is still trying to protect me. Of course, it's going to take decades, maybe the entirety of my life, to get to a place where it doesn't feel like it needs to do it in that way anymore. The only choice I have is to stop operating from the assumption that I am in that place of threat and insecurity to allow my body the possibility it could let it go. And that's what I can control.
Yes, that's absolutely beautiful. What is within your control? And another quote, I don't know who this one is either, but with awareness comes choices. With awareness comes choices. First step, just being aware of like, whoa, that was a trigger. That triggered me. My heart is racing, being like, yep, I'm seeing my connections. And maybe where these came from, maybe my childhood, maybe that crazy job I had where my boss was really scary and I was always afraid of getting fired. And I did that for 5 years. And now I have this fear of getting fired all the time.
Right.
I'm seeing these patterns. I'm aware.
Yep.
And then there's choices. Okay. Who do I choose to be here? How am I going to choose to move forward? I'm feeling these feelings and I'm the same. Public speaking, I get up there and I'm like, I am shaking like a leaf. I'm so nervous. But I am doing it anyway. And if I can impact one person and they take one nugget away and that impacts them, that's worth it. And if everyone else says, wow, that was a huge waste of time, then, I love myself. And I think that a huge piece is that self-acceptance, that deep self-acceptance that I love me and I belong to me. And no matter what happens, I can handle it. And that is something I'm currently working through is I can handle my big emotions, the biggest emotions, because I have, my own phobias around flying or around my spouse dying and being left alone, like big fears, and starting to root into I will be able to handle that. I'm safe. I have capacity. Yeah, I agree with you. It's almost feels like a lifelong journey of learning to love unconditionally. And it starts with yourself and then it goes out to the world. And that's beautiful work. If that's what your life's work is to unconditionally love yourself and others and accept yourself and others, that's beautiful work.
I want to think about, before we tell everybody where they can find you, because I know everyone's going to be like, where and how do I get more Abby in my life? I'm curious because you talked about sort of this iterative journey. I want you to imagine that it's, I don't know, 6 months or a year from now, and you're re-listening to this episode and you're in that space where you've been invited back into people pleasing. You've been invited back into a little bit of that disconnection with the body. You're struggling to feel that sense of rooting in the same way that you are maybe right now or that you're working on. What do you want to say to that Abby to help remind her you've got her and she is safe?
Yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. Part of it is also my faith and my spirituality of I am something that the universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something the ocean is doing. And there's this safety that I find in my higher power as well. And for listeners who maybe don't have that type of relationship, it can be the highest version of yourself. It can be that most magnetic, rooted, grounded version of yourself. And I think because I still struggle with people pleasing 100%. Like it's still, it's in remission, I would say, but it definitely rears its head and it can be very all of a sudden, wow, I'm caught in a people pleasing moment. Self-compassion and thinking, if this were my best friend and she was feeling this triggered, what would I say to her? And my sense of groundedness with the universe, with the great mystery that for whatever reason, I'm given this life and here I am. And I can breathe in that. And there's something bigger that can hold my emotions. And I can lean on that when I need to. And that something bigger is sometimes my most magnetic self.
Mm.
And yeah, that deep self-compassion and unconditional love. I also think about my cat.
Mm-hmm.
I think about my cat curled up in my lap and just purring away. She's the most authentic being. These animals, they don't have that same ego.
Yeah.
They're like, play. I don't care that you're in a meeting. I want to play right now. And
Mm-hmm.
they'll sleep on your lap when you're in the middle of something. They're just very much themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about animals and my cat and that it's okay and it's beautiful to fully be yourself. And don't we love our animals?
Mm-hmm.
We love them because they're free from all of this. They're just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that and how beautiful that is for myself and for the world. And I think those are some ways that I kind of root myself back in to my true self and give myself permission to be triggered. Like, it's okay. It's okay. You might be triggered for a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all right. It is okay. This is a pattern you're breaking. This is rooted in survival. This is that little girl feeling unsafe. And if you need a few days and a nice bubble bath with a star machine and your favorite music, let's do it.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay. Where can people find you? Where do they go? How do they get more you?
You can get more me at my website, which is nurseabbyllc.com. It's nurseabbyllc.com, or on Facebook or Instagram at Abby K. Payne, and that's Abby Kaypayne. Those are how you can find me. And that's the way.
I love it. Okay, listeners, make sure that you go and reach out, connect with Abby. Whether you're like, I need to do some one-on-one work, I just want to be sort of connected on some level, whatever that is, just go look at those links. I'm sure you felt it as you were listening to this episode, that there is a groundedness that Abby has worked really hard to cultivate in herself, and it comes with humility and grace. And I think the more we surround ourselves with people like that, the more we open ourselves up to our own process and learning. And so, Abby, thank you so much for being here. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you for your gifts, for your willingness to be curious with me in this space. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you so much for having me on here. I love your podcast. I love your energy. You have a way of bringing people in with your vulnerability too, of like, we are in this work. I'm not above it. I'm not like the expert, but I'm figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all human, and let's figure it out together.
Mm-hmm. I know we've all felt too alone for too long. And it's important, I think, to come back to this. You're not broken or screwed up or anything. You're just trying to figure it out. And most of us were given broken down toolboxes. And so we're just trying to figure out how to work with what we have and gain some more tools along the way. And so,
yes, beautiful.
Listeners, again, come back to this episode more than once. I think I can already tell there's a few things I want to come back to for myself, and just knowing what grace and space I can give myself in some of these different reflection points and honesty, and just reminding ourselves that this work is not something to achieve, to conquer, to overcome. It is a process of resilience, of iterative work and evolution, and that will be here. Again, this episode, more wonderful voices and stories coming onto this podcast. And so for today, just being with yourself, being kind to yourself that you were able to be here in this episode, make space to think about these things. And I will see you back here next Sunday.